Good morning to everyone joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CCS's Summer in Session. Glad you can join us today. I am Bob Weston. I'm a Senior Vice President with CCS, and I am the practice lead of our independent school group. And I am joined by my colleague, Jennifer. So Jennifer, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Jennifer Devon. I'm the Assistant Vice President with CCS. It's really nice to see some familiar faces on this call, and we look forward to really going through what's going on in the independent school sector, and we look forward to hearing from you all as well. We want this to be an interactive opportunity to discuss, so please at any point in time feel free to chime in either on the chat. We have Caitlin with us too, who's going to be manning our slides and our chat and helping us out, so thank you so much. Let's talk about who's here in the room, or the Zoom, I guess, the Zoom room. But if you don't mind just putting in the chat, where you're from, what's your role at your school, and what's maybe something that you're really excited about for this coming year. And I think that we'll all see kind of who's here, share a little bit about in the chat what you're working on, and it's a great way to connect here in our kind of Zoom universe that we're in. Great. All right, thanks, Caitlin.
Great. So just quickly, what we'd love to cover today is Jennifer's going to walk us through a bit of level setting in terms of the national philanthropic landscape. And then we'll bring it down to a closer look at what's happening in independent school and really around a couple issues. We've had a lot of folks ask about annual fund and annual fund trends. So we're gonna dig into that. And then we're also going to talk about campaigns and campaign fundamentals, and many schools are somewhere in a campaign phase. So we know that's an important topic. So again, as Jennifer said, at any point, please feel free to drop a question in the chat or just come off mute and ask. We want it to be very interactive and conversational. So with that, we will get started. So quick word about CCS. Many of you have been with us before, so I won't go on at length. CCS fundraising consulting firm. This is our 75th year in existence. So we're celebrating a milestone that's exciting. We're a firm that's a large firm. We're over 500 professionals, and we work across nonprofits. But for the purposes of today's discussion, we really have a presence in independent schools. So at any given moment, we're working with between 50 and 60 independent schools, and we'll work with over 150 in any given year. So a real range of schools, real depth of experience, and it's a sector for us that continues to grow and be a really exciting opportunity. So our services, full range of services, as many of you know, we do a lot of campaign work, campaign support, feasibility studies, increasingly a lot of requests around data analytics. I think schools really wanting to be thoughtful about how they use data. So we're doing a lot of analytics work along with some strategic planning. We're digging into some systems assessments as well, but really a full suite of services that we offer schools. And just quickly, some regional partnerships, some schools that we're currently working with, some of whom are on the call today. But again, a real diversity of school, both in terms of size, geography, type. So happy to have all of you with us today.
Great.
And with that, Jennifer, I'll let you give us the overview.
Absolutely. So before we kind of get into best practices and thoughts, we want to talk a little bit about philanthropic trends across the nation. So if you haven't had a chance to read the 350 plus page report that Giving USA puts out, we'll give you a little bit of highlights today. So Giving USA puts together this document, and it just talks about philanthropic trends across the nation for the calendar year of 2021. So please note that this data is for last calendar year. But what's important to note is that giving remains strong. So you'll see 484.85 billion, which adjusted for inflation was just under a 1% decrease. But when you look at it over a 2-year span, 2020 to 2021, it was relatively flat, which is good. And when you look at this chart, that kind of teal color represents all of the years that we saw a recession. And you'll see in 2021, despite having a recession earlier, it still remains strong. And that can be a number of factors. It could be that the COVID factors, and people are still really focused on that. Racial equity and social justice movements have seen a surge in philanthropic support, and it continues to surge. Our economy still performed well, so that also allows for, disposable income for the average family. So we're continuing to see this strong philanthropic support across the nation. So then when we look at who is giving that money, we'll jump to the next. Thank you, Caitlin. So when you look at who's giving the money, it's no surprise here. And for those of you who are working in independent schools, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you, but it's individuals who continue to remain the largest contributor of philanthropic support at nearly 327 billion, or 67% of what is given philanthropically comes from individuals. And when we think about that adjusted for inflation, it's relatively flat. There's a little bit of an increase from 2020 in the actual dollars. But when you also think about what the individuals are giving, it's cash, it's securities, it's properties. So that's all into this data point. Important to note. Another thing to note was that mega gifts. I think that we're seeing almost every week in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, somebody else is giving this mega gift. So in 2021, those mega gifts added up to nearly 15 billion. And that's part of that individual giving that all falls under there. While not necessarily specific for our independent school colleagues, I think it's important to note that corporate giving did see an increase in 2021 from 2022, totaling about 21 billion. And I think it's an interesting conversation that we continue to have, that, individuals are still those who make the contributions, but knowing that corporations increased in 2021 is food for conversation. Why is that? How can organizations lean in a little bit more? And how do individuals help drive that work? So something, food for thought, and a trend worth noting. So when we look at what are the sectors, the education sector continues to be one of our top 2 sectors that receives the philanthropic dollars. Religion being the top sector receiving philanthropic support, and education coming in at 14% of all philanthropic dollars. So when we look at what sectors grew, I think it's important to note that education actually fell just about 2.8% in current dollars in 2021, but yet it still had its second best year on record when you adjust for inflation, but it did not exceed the all-time high in 2020. And I would imagine, and maybe I can get some head nods here, that in 2020, there was a big surge of philanthropic support for schools because of everything that was going on. I see some head nods, so I feel validated here. But it is, we're growing flat, but also important to note that, some sectors were growing. We had 6 sectors grow, and then we had 4 decrease a little bit. And when you think about people kind of going back to their philanthropic priorities, changing from what they may have done in 2020, this is likely a factor. So some of the sectors that grew were arts and culture, public society, which could be, human civil rights organization, research, they kind of all fall under public society, environment and animals, giving to foundations, health and religion, they all grew. Thank you. Go ahead, Bob. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so thinking a little bit more about independent school and about the education sector, you can see that the increase in giving, which Jennifer alluded to, has been, the trajectory has been really quite impressive. And while it dipped this past year, the growth has been steady. And interestingly, in 2021, overall giving to K-12s increased 7.5%. And again, I think this is largely due to COVID. And I think that's been wonderful. And we'll get into this in a second, but I think 21, 22 has been a bit more challenging. I think year 2 of COVID, and I'll be curious to hear your thoughts, has been a bit more challenging for schools. And I think there are several reasons for that we can get into, but overall, given to education is strong. I think COVID shone a bright light on the value proposition of independent school education. So people were prepared to support it. And so the trend is a very positive one. Again, Jennifer alluded to real support around racial equity and justice, and we've certainly seen this reflected in independent schools. I think the way that we've seen it reflected in independent schools, interestingly, is really around campaigns. Anecdotally, I would share that more campaigns today are raising more money for endowment to support program, to support people. Access has become a real focus for schools. Certainly diversity among faculty. So there's a real emphasis in campaigning now on endowment, and endowment focused on leveling the playing field, providing access, recruiting and retaining diverse faculty. And so that's been really interesting as schools have become, I think, much better about articulating the need for endowment for these programs and for these areas. So you can see that the increase has been dramatic, and that has certainly been reflected also in independent school campaigns. So want to get in to annual fund trends, and this topic for us is top of mind because so many schools have been asking us about annual funds, and there seems to be a real appetite out there to think differently about annual funds. So I want to talk a little bit about the trends and about what we're seeing and what is happening out there. No surprise, parents constitute the largest percentage of annual giving. And this is a trend that has been increasing. I think schools are increasingly reliant on current parents as donors to annual fund. So the average here you can see is 39%. I would say it's actually higher than that. And I'm sure all of you would validate that in terms of these are discrete categories, but we certainly have trustees who are parents, alums who are parents. So parent giving really constitutes the lion's share of many schools' annual funds. And I know you are all eager to grow your engagement programs among alums. That percentage of alums has been slipping over the years. And so really want to talk about engagement strategies to make sure that we stay relevant for our alums, that we engage our young alums. But again, schools have relied, particularly day schools, heavily on their parents for annual support. And again, during COVID, that proved challenging at times. So we did a pulse survey, and this data is frankly a little stale. So we did this right at the end of 2021. We had a survey of 138 schools. And what we found is the majority, 80%, were going to meet their annual fund goal in 2021. Interestingly, 2022 has proven more challenging. So again, we're still collecting the data, but I would say of the 138 schools, really 2022, about a quarter of them are going to fall short of having met their annual fund goal. I think schools struggled to get out of the gate this year. Again, I think everybody understood in the first year of COVID the importance of support, so people rallied. But I think 2022 has proven a little harder. Of course, the economy was a bit bumpier as well. So, so I think there was more struggle this year. And on the other side of that, I think the community events, what I'll call community events, the auctions, the galas, I think continue to be important sources of revenue. And those community building events and community funding events continue to be strong for many schools. The last bullet on the right is one that I think is really interesting. We hosted a conversation at CASE-NACE conference. And just a couple of weeks ago, I hosted a group of advancement directors from New England around rethinking and reimagining the annual fund. I think there's a growing frustration in terms of the current model that folks are eager to rethink. And so would love to hear your thoughts about that. And I'll share some of what's been discussed. But I think folks feel like the business model, if you will, about fundraising for the gap is increasingly challenging and not a compelling ask. So schools are eager to think about how we might do it differently. So when
Go
we
ahead,
talk about,
Jesse.
oh,
Well,
go ahead,
I was just
Jennifer.
gonna add a comment, Bob, maybe something for the group, just to support different thinking about the annual fund. There's a good book out there. It's called Mind the Gap.
Mind the Gap, yeah.
Dr. Richard Sahoyan, he was, I don't know if he still is, but he was the president of Columbia Grammar and Prep, New York City. Took a bankrupt school to thriving over a long period of time, and he attributes different thinking about the annual fund to being one of the main drivers there. It's worth reading.
Yep. Thank you for that, Jesse. And I will say a couple specific ideas out there that our schools are thinking about. So there are a couple schools that are thinking about shortening their annual fund. You know, we all know that let's say 80% of the money that you will raise in the annual fund comes in before the end of the calendar year. So some schools are going to have embraced that and are shortening their annual fund and ending the annual fund at the end of the calendar year, and then really using the second semester to focus on cultivating major gifts or focused on their galas and their auctions. And so that's one strategy. I think the other strategy that schools have talked about is getting away from, in essence, raising money that has already been spent, right? Funding that gap and really thinking about, can we redo the budget in a way where we are raising money for next year? So the ask is about all the exciting things that we can do with philanthropy for the coming school year, as opposed to simply filling that hole, if you will, of money that's already been spent. So it's interesting that there's, again, this groundswell of support to reimagine annual giving. So when we think about aspects of annual fund, and I love this slide and I love this picture, and when we were building this deck, I think, you know, for me, it always comes back to the sassy little girl in the backpack to remind us that annual fund really is about students, and it's about supporting the programs that make our schools vital for those who attend. And I think always bring it back to being student focused in the stories that we tell, and how we think about engaging in donors. So really, our case for support has to be grounded in a student experience and about the programs and the people that support that experience. So, you know, when thinking about putting together a plan, we want to think about the potential. Whoops, sorry, Caitlin, can we just hop back for 1 second? Thanks. You know, all of these aspects become important, and the theme in all of these slides will be really about building a plan. I think the idea that we want to do more than just put together a calendar of appeals. We want to build a real plan that has a narrative, that tells a story, that engages leadership thoughtfully, that moves prospects through a process and stewards them well. And so we'll talk more specifically about what this plan looks like. Thanks, Caitlin. So in crafting your annual fund plan, you know, for us, it comes back to the strength of case, engaging leadership, and building out that plan. So I would encourage you, and we would encourage you, to think about your annual fund in the very same way that you would think about a campaign, right? Think about your donor pipeline, think about your gift pyramid, knowing that, again, the vast majority of your dollars are going to come from a relatively small percentage of donors. Who are those donors? How are you engaging them? How are you building out your table of gifts? What's your strategy? How are you qualifying folks, new families to that pipeline? And how are you thinking about putting that gift pyramid together is really important. So that data analysis over the summer, really taking the time to look at and evaluate the past year, what happened, and to think about how to build that gift pyramid for this coming year is important. Refreshing your case for support. I think, again, this may sound obvious. It's a challenge, I think, every year to rethink how you want to message annual fund. And one of the questions that we'll have for you later that we get a lot is unrestricted versus restricted. I think increasingly there's a desire for donors to want to direct their dollars, to provide restricted opportunity to understand where their money's going and what it's supporting. So thinking carefully about how to message that and how to refresh your case for support is important. And then engaging volunteers. I think, again, you know better than I the challenge in terms of volunteer management, but so important and critical to think about the board and their role, your advancement committee, and volunteers in terms of how you leverage them in the annual giving. And then on the last piece of it is, again, I think we're all focused on the engagement strategy, but the stewardship strategy is equally important. So how you think about, again, when you think about your gift pyramid, what are you doing for those donors? How are you reporting out to them? How are you keeping them engaged? How are you sharing with them the story of their investment in the school is really important to consider. So along with building out a good annual fund plan and strategy, I think the companion piece to that is really to build out a strong stewardship plan. So thinking about the annual fund, and again, there's a lot of words on the slide, and so I won't go through all of that, but really would encourage you, and I'm sure all of you do some version of this, is really to think about the calendar and think specifically about what you want to achieve and when. So it isn't just a calendar of appeals, it's really specific activities that need to happen to make sure that you're getting your annual fund off to a good start. So it's the analysis that goes on in the summer, it's the qualifying of new families in the wealth screening. It's putting together perhaps the theme for the year and crafting that narrative. And it's really about engaging the board early and making sure they understand the importance of their leadership and getting that first appeal out there. And I would encourage you not to be shy about it. I think, we all know that but for philanthropy, independent schools wouldn't exist. They are predicated and built upon philanthropy. So sharing that story and that message is really important. And so I think, to think early in terms of the fall, in terms of cultivation events, again, leadership engagement, and regular prospect strategy meetings will be important. But again, you all have some version of this, but would encourage you to be really mindful of building out your calendar of events with specific action items, both for your own staff, but also for your key volunteers. So your advancement committee, and what the expectation is for them over the course of the year, and to be really explicit in putting that on paper and in sharing that. Annual fund roles, and again, I don't want to be repetitive, but think carefully about the different folks and how they're going to be involved. Head of school can play a very key role early in the year in terms of setting tone, delivering the message, again, a theme. Of course, the head of school is incredibly busy, so be really thoughtful and strategic about how you use their time. But certainly they can engage folks early, and they can share the importance of philanthropy for the school, and they can really help establish that culture of philanthropy. So think carefully about how to position the head of school to do that work. Again, I talked about board members, but really impressing upon the board the importance of their gifts coming in early. It would be great to take the message out to the community that the board is 100% committed to the annual fund early in the school year. And then advancement committee. And I want to talk about the advancement committee for a second, because I think many of you this will resonate, that oftentimes advancement committees are a little bit passive, and you probably feel like you end up spending a lot of time reporting out to them, as opposed to having them be active partners in fundraising. And so I want to be really explicit in terms of making sure that you are giving your advancement committee a role in your fundraising program. So really think about how to put them in front of donors, how to train them and coach them in terms of sharing the story, and giving them lists of prospects to engage, but really asking them to be partners with you in this work is incredibly important. And then in terms of your own team, again, being well organized in terms of roles that everyone is going to play in the important work of the annual fund. So some challenges that we've heard, and again, would love to open it up and talk about this. So when we did the survey, everybody worries about donor acquisition and retention. Donor acquisition really in terms of alumni, how we acquire those folks who might have been distant from us, and then retention. And of course, retention can be challenging if we're reliant on parents, right? There's a natural exit point, if you will, after their kids graduate. I think that retention proves challenging. Certainly to keep them retain them at the same level is challenging. So we're often talking to schools about donor acquisition and retention strategies. I mentioned the restricted versus unrestricted. Increasingly, how can you be creative and direct and explicit and compelling in offering those directed opportunities or restricted opportunities within annual giving, while at the same time making sure that everyone understands the value and the importance of unrestricted support for the school. I think schools have gotten much better about branding and messaging. I think there's been an intentional move from what I'll call a classic development model to an advancement model that's more integrated in terms of communication, enrollment, and would encourage you to think that way, even if you don't have that advancement model, to think how can you be more integrated and coordinated in your messaging. But that's increasingly important that there's a shared understanding of what the school's about and what the school hopes to achieve. And then strategies around alumni engagement. One thing that's not on here, and we're going to transition to talking about campaigns, but we're asked frequently how to position the annual fund in the context of a campaign. Schools want to know, should the campaign be comprehensive? What are the benefits of a comprehensive campaign versus a standalone capital campaign that doesn't include the annual fund? So we can talk about that. But I'm going to pause for a second to ask all of you if these challenges resonate, or if there are any challenges that you have that you'd like us to consider this morning and to chat about.
Bob, I have a question. This is Mary Catherine in Houston. Our, I guess, challenge, we have been very fortunate, and our fundraising dollars we've hit our goals and far exceeded the past few years. We've been very lucky about that, but our parent participation has fallen quite a bit. Are other people seeing that? I mean, like 10% or more falling, like less parents are giving more money. That makes sense.
And thank you for that. I would say generally, and I'd be curious to hear if it's validated in this group. I think that is in fact the trend, right? That more dollars are coming from fewer donors, be it in the annual fund or in a campaign. Certainly in the campaign environment, and you all, I'm sure have heard this, it used to be sort of the 80-20 rule. It's really now, 90-10, 95-5. So again, there's a shift. But I'd be curious to hear, you said you were lucky, but I'm sure that you were more than lucky. So I'd be curious to hear your strategies for how you exceeded your goals, and you said the past couple of years have been really good. So I'm curious to share, what did you do? How did that happen?
Well, we had really good volunteer leaders involved with us. We also had a board. We went through a little bit of a difficult time community-wide in the past year or so. So we were concerned we weren't going to raise money and meet our goals. But I think we had some parents who felt that the way that they could show their support of the school was through their fundraising dollars. And so we had about 250 donors, which is unreal. Some increased, some doubled, some tripled their gifts from years past. So I would like to say it was our volunteer leaders and my strategies that worked, but I think part of it was just people really wanting to show their support of the school that way. We have about 30 engaged parent couples on our leadership council, plus another 5 different chair tiers. We engage our faculty and staff to be captains. We have alumni chairs. So we do a good job of getting a robust group of volunteers helping us. Our board is an area that we could grow with their participation and just being involved in the asking and then stewarding donors. But we've done pretty much the same thing year over year of soliciting donors in the same way. I just am curious though if other people are doing more for participation or just are so happy to have the money that they don't care. I mean, we've heard one school locally say they didn't care about participation because you can't take it to the bank. Do other people think that too, or is this something that we should also try to focus on?
Looking in the chat, it looks like some of those who have posted in there are seeing a trend for sure that is matching kind of a general trend of philanthropy, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah. So, and again, I'll be quiet in a second, but I would love to respond to that because I think it's an important question. And while we know that participation is not where the dollars come from, I don't think it's an either or. I really do think it's a both and, because participation is important. And again, it goes back to what I said, that our schools, they really are founded on philanthropy. And so participation is a really important way of building a culture of philanthropy, a culture of understanding the importance of voluntary support for our schools. So, I think it would be easy. And again, you all have the pressure of managing budgets and offices and staffing, and wanting to show a return on that investment is really important. And oftentimes engagement is hard to measure. I think participation can be expensive in terms of the time that we spend and the resources that we dedicate to it. But I would be, I would be mindful of reinforcing the importance of that engagement and the importance of participation. I wouldn't be obsessed with it, and it isn't where your dollars are really going to come from, but it really is important in terms of helping you build a culture of philanthropy that over time is going to make an important difference for the institution. And I think all of you know examples, and you hear examples of those schools that have participation that's off the charts. And I would argue that it's substantive, and that real dollars come from that level of participation in those institutions. So I do think I think a culture of participation is important, and I think spending resources and time on those programs is vital over the long run. And I'd be, and anybody feel free to push back if you disagree, but I think the schools that we work with, I think we see that that's really important.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it.
Another good question in the chat is from Sarah, wanting to know if those who felt that they were not going to meet their annual fund goal, was it schools who also increased their goal as a result of 2021 being so high? Is anyone feeling like that was part and parcel, which I guess is adjacent to our conversation about participation rates? Is anyone feeling that perhaps that might be a reason for not reaching and exceeding your goal?
So Jennifer, I'm going to pipe in again, and then I'll turn it over to you and I'll be quiet. But I think it's such a good issue. And one of the things that I actually had wanted to share is just that around goal setting, right? So again, we work with a lot of schools where their chief advancement officer, frankly, is frustrated because they don't have much of a voice in the goal of the annual fund. It's something that's handed down to them from the CFO or the business manager to say, hey, here's what we need. And so, I was remiss in my comments about building out a plan, that part of the value of building out that plan and that table of gifts is to really work with your CFO and your business manager to educate them around what philanthropy really looks like and the strategy that goes into raising that money and what the appropriate goal ought to be. It doesn't mean that it can't be ambitious, but I hear from a lot of schools of frustration where the people who raise the money don't really get to participate in establishing the goal and being part of a larger strategic conversation about the budget. So I think that's a really important point. And I think for those of you who may experience that frustration, I want to encourage you to advocate with your head of school and your CFO about really having a place at that table, if you will, when it comes to setting budget and it comes to determining what the appropriate annual fund goal ought to be. Great. All right, Jennifer, over to you.
Over to me. Okay, so as Bob alluded to in the Philanthropic Pulse survey that was set out, we learned that about 71% of schools who responded in the survey said that they are going to undertake some version of a campaign. We know some of you on this very chat now are living somewhere between campaign planning all the way to public phase announcement celebration. So no surprises here. Independent schools are saying this is part of our work. This is part of our strategy. Being in a campaign is part of this. So no surprises here. And when you think about if you're in the planning stage, which many are, as you can see in this chart, many are in the planning stages, are the questions that you're asking yourself around what are my goals? You know, we just talked about, is annual fund part of your campaign goal? You know, do you have a compelling story? I would say that Mary Catherine, your school must have had a compelling story. You must have been able to articulate your case so well to get people to really buy in and elevate. So really thinking through how am I articulating our case in a way that's meaningful? Do I have adequate staff? That is something we've been really seeing in independent schools. Do we have the capacity to build out the program that we really need to? Do I have enough gift officers? Do I have a director of annual giving? You know, insert position here. You really want to think through, am I equipped to move forward successfully? So most of those who responded to the survey are thinking through those things. Now I see some of your faces who are actively in the, I am taking part, I have kicked off, I'm in ongoing campaign, and you're really thinking through, hey, I set the foundation for this and now I'm seeing success. So please, by all means, should you feel very comfortable in sharing where you are in your journey. I saw a couple of you posted already that you are actively in campaigns. So thanks so much. It's great to have people to talk through this with. But when we think about, you know, what are our 4 pillars of campaign success, you want to think about it. And I always say to everyone when we do these type of presentations, if you walk away with one thing from this presentation, I hope it's this. You know, a successful campaign, whether it's an annual fund project or a huge comprehensive campaign, you need 4 things: case, leadership, prospects, plan. And on a Thursday morning, when you say to yourself, I'm not sure what I need to do, you go back to those 4 pillars. So when you're thinking about campaign success, the case, we've already talked about that. How can you articulate this in a thoughtful way? How are you sharing with your community what you're trying to achieve in a meaningful and strategic way? Sometimes we have what lives in our head of what our school is doing, but we don't articulate it effectively to our community. So that's a really big part of setting your campaign up for success, is being able to articulate that. We call them philanthropic champions on this slide, but our leadership, and that's anything from our internal school leadership to our board chairs, our trustees, our campaigns, our captains, whoever they are, bringing them in, making them feel like they are part of this work. Anyone who is in an active campaign right now knows how important those individuals are to our success. In a perfect world, maybe the head of school would see every single person, but we know that that is not feasible. So how do you extend that? You do that through recruiting, training, and retaining quality volunteers who are here to help further the project. Prospects. Oh, go ahead, Bob. I see you chiming in.
Oh, sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt, Jennifer, but I think the one comment that I would make, and again, I think many of you on the call will appreciate this, is, you know, in terms of leadership, there's an unprecedented thing happening at the head level where we have more turnover than ever before. And, you know, when you talk to the folks at NIS and you talk to the search consultants, they're seeing over the next 2 or 3 years, even more turnover. So I share that because I'm sure some of you have new heads of school and how to think about that in the context of a campaign and think about that leadership, I think is really important, because at the end of the day, your head of school really is your chief fundraiser in a campaign. And I think with so much turnover, how we position the head for success is really important. So I think that's an added layer of complexity and importance in campaigning. So I just wanted to share that, Jennifer. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
I was just say, our association here in Virginia and another national association that I'm in, we did heads studies over the last year for our cohort, and last 5-year turnover is 40%. 40% of heads have changed at independent schools in the last 5 years. And as you said, they expect that to continue.
That's fascinating. I just wrote that fact down. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate that. Well, all the more reason to be bringing in and orienting and training your leadership to continue to move things on despite what else is going on over here. So our third piece is our prospects, because we all know we can't do any type of fundraising if we don't have prospects. And as Bob alluded to in the annual fund slide, how are we breaking down our independent school constituencies? How are we engaging our current parents, our current grandparents, our alumni, our former parents, our former, maybe non-grads who still have an affinity for the school in some way, shape, or form? So how are we engaging those, and how are we identifying and prioritizing them? For many of our schools, you've got an excellent pipeline and you feel as if, okay, I have resources. Where do I start? What do I do? How can I do this? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then finally, the plan. Just as Bob talked about for your annual fund plan, you want to really think through your table of gifts, your plan, your tailored focus for a campaign. I know anyone who has worked with me has heard me say, like, we don't throw spaghetti at the wall. We really think through thoughtfully, how do we move through this process? Because we're not just going to send an email out to our entire constituency base. We're going to be really thoughtful about how we fundraise and how we engage people. So the first pillar being our case, and I won't spend too much time on this because Bob talked a little bit about this as well, but you want to think through your case for support. What's your mission? What challenge is it? What are you trying to overcome? What are your goals? All of those things that help you answer and really format how to do this. And then when we think about what are those case elements that we are seeing in campaigns, especially for independent schools, you might have a capital element, you might be doing some type of construction. Programmatic elements is in everything that we are seeing, because it's going back to the kids, the families, those who are being supported by the school. Endowment. I would be curious if people wouldn't mind sharing in the chat if endowment is part of your campaign or your future campaigns plans, and are you seeing an uptick? Because we're seeing on a grand scale that the independent school sector, those responding to campaign case elements, are finding the endowment to be especially interesting. And we're finding that the endowment piece of campaigns are getting funded faster than we had seen in the past. I see Bob shaking his head, and he's working with a lot of independent schools, and it's not just in one area. It's across the independent school sector that endowment and impact is integral. Oh, thank you, Doug. Doug said is a vital part of our campaign. And how are we doing that? What are families interested in? Is longevity. It's really thinking strategically about philanthropy, and that can be done through endowment. And then finally, incorporating your annual fund. Many independent schools, and frankly, many organizations, not just in the school sector, are putting annual fund as part of their larger campaign plan, and they're articulating it that way. They're really being thoughtful about those conversations that they have with prospects about, here is how you can be involved. And we want it to be a comprehensive way of looking at supporting XYZ organization, XYZ school. Thanks. Well, we're in a quiet phase, and endowment is the biggest part of our campaign. However, the unrestricted endowment was hard to sell. That is really fascinating. Many people are wanting to, especially if your school is set up where, endowed funds are a big part of your community's culture, it can be hard to articulate that. So really driving down deep into your case of how do I share the importance of unrestricted endowment. This is great. Thank you so much. So when we think about, and we'll move on from the case, but please feel free to keep writing down your thoughts here and we can kind of compile all of them. But when we look at our philanthropic champions, it's everyone that we just talked about. It's our head of school, it's the development/advancement team, because we're seeing a lot of this comprehensive work in advancement. It's your trustees, your board members, it's your other staffs. I loved hearing that you used faculty as captains. I mean, that is a fantastic way of engaging the community, because the community wants to be with your faculty, wants to be with your teachers. So what a great way to bring them in and make them part of your work in advancement. Engaging your steering committee on a high level, or campaign executive committee, whatever language you choose to use them, and making sure that they feel like they have a true leadership role. Your friends and supporters, And then your campaign experts, the Bobs and the Jennifers. We love being part of your process and helping with this work. So when you think about your funders, when you think about your prospects for our independent school communities, it's not necessarily going out and buying lists. That's not your world. It's bringing in who is that has that affinity, who do we have access to within our prospect pipeline. And when you're trying to prioritize that, you have to continue to think back to the golden triangle, as we call it many times. It's someone who has affinity for your school. They love what you're doing. They have capacity. So there's the ability there to make a large financial investment into your project. And also it's access. Access can be really challenging sometimes for our independent school colleagues because you might have XYZ billionaire as an alum, but you don't have access to them. So how do you bring them in? So you're really thinking through, how do we do this? And you've got a lot of opportunity to do this through engaging your leadership, using data as a tool. For some of you on this conversation, I know that you've used prospect research, you used data analytics. So it's a great way, that's a good starting point to utilize a data analytics program to say, based on what we see through the lens of data, here's what your prospect pipeline could look like, because this is what we have within your database. And it gives you a starting point. We all know philanthropy is a mix of art and science. There's the science piece. And it allows you to bring that piece over to your board member, your steering committee, and say, here's what data tells us is our pipeline. We need your support to really bring these folks along. So it's a good way to start when you're really thinking through your campaign planning. And also, for all of our friends here going into a public phase, this is an activity you can do again. You can say, okay, I need to recalibrate my pipeline. I'm in this public phase, or I'm nearing my public phase, and I really want a boost of momentum and activity. Let's look at, again, who's left in the pipeline and be thoughtful about setting meetings and discussions. So really thinking through that. And that's all really a part of our campaign plan. When you think about the plan, you think about the strategy. How are you going to approach people? You want it to be personal. You want everyone to feel like they are part of this work, just like you would in an annual fund work where you're sharing the information, you're sharing the importance of the work. You're doing that in a campaign as well. Many of our campaigns are rooted in some sort of planning study. And I thought it was really interesting, Bob, that you said our advancement professionals need to be at the table discussing the feasibility of philanthropy in that particular year when it comes to the annual fund. But when you're doing a campaign, you want to have a general understanding of how is your community going to react to these case elements. You may think they're great in advancement, but is the community also thinking that? Do they also have that love for that case element? Will, you said, endowment is important to the community, but how do we really engage them in an unrestricted endowment? So it's really thinking through doing a planning study before you do anything. And your plan is really the blueprint. It's how are we going to go through this? Campaigns are a big investment of time, of thought, of strategy. So you really want to be thoughtful about how you're moving through this in a way that creates momentum, creates excitement, and brings everybody in. Like Bob said, in independent school communities, it is important to bring everybody in, and participation is important in educating everyone that they are part of this. It's not just this core group of families or alumni who are going to keep this campaign going. It's everybody. So when you think about the campaign roles, they don't differ too much from your annual fund roles, but maybe a little bit in nuances. So your head of school is going to continue to be that face. That is the person that is going to be out there championing the campaign, really defining the vision. Most important, this is where we are. This is where we're going. This campaign is going to explain how we're going to get there and why it's so important. They're going to be part of gift requests. They're going to be part of meetings to engage your volunteer leadership, all of those things of building a culture of philanthropy. Your board members, your trustees, they're going to be part of the campaign, some more than others. Not every single trustee has to be a campaign volunteer, but it's important that they are on board. They are ambassadors for your school. They are the ones out there talking. So everyone needs to be saying the same thing. If head of school is saying something, the board of trustees should also be saying that same thing so that you're moving forward in a comprehensive way. So really contributing to that culture of philanthropy. Your steering committee is that group of individuals, inclusive of board members, who are helping to really run the operations of the campaign. They're responsible for making this successful. They're championing it. It's their number one priority. They're out on gift requests. They're helping recruit other volunteers, and they're really driving the momentum of the campaign and supporting the school's leadership. And then you think your development, your advancement staff, and there is a role for everybody in a campaign. It is not just the 3 gift officers you have. Everybody should be a part of this. Your database services, your donor services team, they're a huge part of campaign work. They should be involved in strategy meetings. They should know what's going on. They should be working really collaboratively with your major gift officers. The annual fund team, whether you have elected to choose the annual fund as a case element or not, annual fund directors or annual fund team members should be well informed about what's going on in a campaign, because you have to work together regardless. So community and sharing should always be a part of your weekly conversations, so that no one person ever feels like, I don't know what's going on, or I'm going to have some kind of cross-section with a donor. Everything needs to be collaborative when you're in a campaign, and setting that expectation from the beginning is essential, that we all work together regardless of what case element is where in a campaign, because it does continue to contribute to this culture of philanthropy, and your community will see that. Your community will see that your advancement team is working together in a meaningful way. And finally, we'll put this on here, having your campaign consultant, the Bobs, the Jennifers, supporting you along the way to help you with the management piece. Fundraising is fundraising, but campaigns are a lot of operations. There's a lot of operational foundation that goes into setting something up to be successful. Again, we do not throw spaghetti at the wall. So we want to help in all of the elements of a campaign, in your strategy, in your design, and in your activation. That can be the toughest part. You've got all your pieces ready, and now it's time to go. And this is where campaign consultants or counsel can help you to drive your excellence and really drive that, momentum, and ensure that your best practices are in play. When you bring a lot of people together, we love our people, but everyone's always got an idea. So it's really helpful to kind of bring everybody. I say this to my clients now, are we in the same boat, rowing the same direction? And that is focused when you're thinking through your plan. So with that said, we'd love to, we've got a little bit of time here before the hour, but we'd love to just open it up to any kind of remaining questions or just general thoughts for those of you who might be in a campaign that's inclusive of an annual fund, or someone who said, I'm going to specifically not include the annual fund in our campaign, but this is how we're operating, or any other questions that are kind of general to our independent school colleagues. All right. Well, if there are no questions, I'm just double checking the chat here to make sure that we jumped on everybody's thoughts. But we certainly appreciate kind of everybody's thoughts on this, and we want you to think through, like, how are these elements of your work happening every day? Oh, thanks, Caitlin. It looks like we've got a recent article on how you can promote your school-wide support for campaign strategic priorities. So Caitlin put that link in our chat. We certainly encourage you to look through that and see how it resonates with your community. Bob, I'd love to turn it over to you for some last thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. And thank all of you for attending. So to the article that Caitlin put in the chat, and to what we talked about earlier in terms of head turnover, again, in the rhythm of schools, when you have a new head of school, that in year 1, year 2, likely you're going to enter the strategic planning process. And again, I would encourage you to really make sure that you're part of that strategic planning process, because of course, at the end of the day, for most strategic plans, a campaign is going to come next. And I think it's really vital that that's a coordinated effort, and that the chief advancement officer has a role in that process. to determine what that strategic plan looks like and what the funding opportunities available are. And the last thing I would add, Jennifer, to what you shared in terms of campaigns. So all of you, or most of you, are at schools that have deep history. And I think the most successful campaigns are those that are able to message the thoughtful evolution of the school versus the change of the school. In other words, I think campaigns done well really help schools evolve in a compelling way where their mission is always crystal clear and known to everyone in the community. And the message really is how the campaign is going to help the school evolve and to help it realize its mission versus a campaign that's designed to change course or change direction. And I just think, I have seen a couple schools where that has been a challenge. So I think the thoughtful messaging around campaigns supporting really intentional evolution is important. Great. Well, we thank you all for joining us today, and please feel free to be in touch if you have any questions or you want to follow up. And again, as Caitlin said, we will share out the deck and the recording, and appreciate your time, and hope all of you catch a little bit of break before the start of I'm sure what will be a busy school year.
Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.